In this forest, a seed is about to take root. It will grow to be a massive war, spanning continents and defining the future of empires. But in an era where most wars follow a pattern of field warfare and battles between long lines of men and cannon, this war will stand out. The European empires that rule over most of the world are about to encounter a whole new type of fighting that will change warfare forever. Here the Native Americans have lived, and over thousands of years have developed a style of fighting unique from any employed by their colonizers. They know how to run through woods soft-footed and unheard in single file to hide their approach. They travel in small groups to escape detection by enemy tribes. And they know how to strike without warning, without preliminaries, when their enemy least expects it. These methods have before been used by Britannic tribes and Huns, and in The Art of War, Sun Tzu had suggested their use. But the world powers refused to use such tactics, considering them barbaric and calling their users savages. Without regard to their ethical values, these tactics, to be considered guerrilla warfare, are well tried and burgeoning to be let loose on the world, and the moment of their emergence is at hand. It is the spring of 1753. The French fear British expansion into the Ohio Valley and have begun to build forts to protect their territory and also to claim parts of the valley. The British see this as a threat to British settlements recently built in the valley. Many colonists wished for war in the hope of expanding the colonies and pushing back the French. Headlines read, but what engrosses the attention at present is their invasion of Virginia in a profound peace, and well it may, since that our colonies on that continent are of the utmost importance. As forts are built and weapons and ammunition stocked, there was a never-silent conflict going on. The British and French aren't alone in the Ohio backcountry. The Iroquois nation spreads across the Ohio Valley. To the south live the Creek, Choctaw, and Cherokee tribes. Both the British and French recognize the necessity of keeping these tribes as allies. For wars, the Native Americans would often supply warriors, supplies, and valuable information about land and terrain that could be used for planning ambushes. The French, in the end, managed to secure most of the northern tribes as allies, while the British convinced tribes in the Ohio Valley to agree to neutrality. Throughout the war, French commanders will discuss tactics and strategies of Native American allies, helping give them the upper hand. After hearing reports that the French are building forts, Virginia Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie dispatches Lieutenant Colonel George Washington to request the French to cease building forts and depart from the Ohio Valley, though they ultimately refuse. As a result, Washington is reinforced and sent to build a fort on the Ohio River. While en route, Washington receives word from scouts of a French force 50 strong encamped in a sheltered glen off the main road. Accompanied by Native American allies and a small force of soldiers, Washington surrounds the glen, then attacks, wounding or capturing most of the French within 15 minutes. He will remember these tactics 26 years later when he is appointed to lead the colonial army. The Battle of Drummondville Glen, as it would come to be called, becomes the catalyzer for an all-out war. After this battle, Washington retreats to the camp at Great Meadows. Fearing imminent attack from the French, the unit constructs Fort Necessity. Over the next month, reinforcements arrive, swelling the force to 400. Then a French and Indian force 700 strong is spotted. The British, expecting a proper fight, where both sides line up across from each other and open fire, march to the front of the fort to engage the enemy. However, the Native Americans allied with the French have convinced them to fight in small groups from the trees, where they can shoot the British from behind cover. After a day-long battle, there was a truce as the British expect surrender. The written terms of surrender, however, are badly translated from French and confusion ensues. The final surrender includes this clause: as our intention had never been to trouble the peace and good harmony which reigns between the two friendly princes, but only to revenge assassination which has been done to one of our officers. Meaning the British have accidentally confessed to assassinating a French officer, a serious charge in peacetime. Before Washington had even returned, Dinwiddie was already on the move again. he had sent a force of 40 men to construct a stockade fort on the Ohio River. French soldiers come across this fort shortly after construction has begun and force the British force to leave, confiscating construction tools and using them to finish the fort, which they named Fort Duquesne. The news of these events reached the British in August, and plans are made that General Braddock should leave a force to dislodge the French from Fort Duquesne. In the spring, Braddock leads 1,500 troops to attack Fort Duquesne. While on the road, the company is ambushed by French and Indians and is forced to retreat with the enemy shooting from within the trees. Braddock is killed and Washington takes over the remaining 500 troops. The next year, Montcalm leads the French to a never victory at Fort Oswego. Then, while troops are away from Fort William Henry preparing to attack Louisburg, he places the fort under siege. Facing Montcalm's force of 7,000, the British soon surrender. Under the terms of surrender, the British are to be allowed to leave in peace in return for the release of French captives. However, the Native American tribes that had attacked with the French do not agree with this treaty and kill over 100 of the unarmed prisoners. This horrid scene of blood and slaughter obliged our officers to apply to the French guard for protection, which they refused and told them that they must take to the woods and shift for themselves. Joseph Fry. After this battle, most Native American tribes go home enraged, and the French use of guerrilla tactics all but stops. After several more years of fighting, in which the French have steadily lost ground, the French call for peace. Negotiations are begun shortly, resulting in the signing of the Treaty of Paris on February 10, 1763, which ends the French and Indian War. At first it appears guerrilla warfare tactics have returned to the backcountry of the Native Americans, and that the European empires will not use them any further. However, in 1775, war breaks out again. The colonies now fight for independence. The first battles of the war, Lexington and Concord, are won through guerrilla warfare when the colonists exchange fire with the superior British force from cover of the trees, advancing in individual groups as the British retreat. George Washington, when appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, continues using the guerrilla warfare tactics he learned in the French and Indian War. In the Forage War, a campaign against British supply convoys and companies, small groups of soldiers would set ambushes and attack with speed, grabbing supplies and disappearing into the forest. In the southern colonies, the Continental Army used guerrilla warfare tactics and hit-and-run raids against British troops, drawing them into the forest in pursuit, then using tree cover to fight until the British returned to their camp. While the Revolutionary War is not won by use of guerrilla warfare tactics, they play a major part in it, and by the end of the war, British troops are resorting to using them. The colonists' success with using guerrilla warfare against a more powerful opponent will inspire many empires and countries to use it, and will establish it as a legitimate type of fighting. As it turns out, guerrilla warfare tactics will be used in almost every war following their emergence. World War II. The Vietnam War. The Iraq War. And all this comes from an encounter between the Indians and the French, in which knowledge of a fighting style called guerrilla warfare was exchanged, and thus unleashed upon the world.